Take your copy of God's Word, go to the book of Ephesians, chapter 6. And if you're visiting with us today, I want to say I appreciate you and thank you for choosing to worship with us. And if you do not have a Bible, there is a Bible in the front of that, in the pew in front of you, and you can turn to page 200, and you will find yourself at the same place in Ephesians, chapter 6. And as we continue in this series of war, and we talked about the war we're in, I had hoped to be able to tie together everything today, this morning. But it came pretty evident that unless we spent an hour and a half here this morning, there was no way I'd be able to get through everything that's in this section of Scripture. So I don't think anybody's down for that. So I have to split it up a little bit, and I will continue it on into September. Unfortunately, I will not be able to be with you this coming Sunday. We will be in Georgia at Woodstock First Baptist there for the memorial of Sarah's granddad, Pastor Ron Allen, who passed away. And in his later years, he was a very integral part of that church there. It was a very large church, but a very active church, and he was active in the Sunday school classes there. And they are really, they've helped a lot. And Pastor Jeremy, I think, even went and sat with him and prayed with him before the end there. And it just shows you, no matter how big a church is, a pastor should always be a shepherd. And that's what he showed to Sarah's granddad. And so we're going to go down there with the family and celebrate his life and have a memorial with him. But our own Mr. Cody will be here in the pulpit filling in for me. And I know that God has something for him to speak to us. So I hope you come and you come ready to hear what God has for you. Because I know every time we come into this building, it's for a purpose and a reason. And God has something for him to speak to you that I couldn't say. And so I would encourage you to show up, be faithful, be in your Sunday school classes, as I said, and we'll move on from there. But as we continue this study, one idea we must understand as we move forward is that it is not enough simply to know who our enemy is. It's a very good and it's a very important part. It's something, as we said, we needed to know, but it's not all of it. We must also be able to meet that enemy in battle, because the goal is victory. Not just in the war at total, but in each individual battle. Because war is a condition in which peace does not exist. It is a collection of conflicts, a series of battles strung out over a long period of time until victory is found on one side or the other. So that means a battle lost does not mean the war is lost. But the reverse is also true. Just because we have won battles up till now does not mean that we will win our individual war through our life and to be a good witness all the way through. We mentioned this early on, that one of the most dangerous things that we can think is that because I have done good so far, that I will also do good into the future. That was David's problem in his life. When he falls into the sin that he falls into, he is an older man. He has fought many battles, and he figured, you know what? I don't need to go to war. I'll stay home because I've done all that. I've been there and I've seen everything. And when he sat down and took a break and didn't continue to be vigilant, as we've been talking about, he fell into sin. And we cannot fall into the safety of won battles in the past. We have more ahead of us. And though we know from Revelation that ultimately we win this war, we do also realize that we go through battles, many battles. There are many conflicts through which we must endure. And I will be making a few callbacks to our message this morning, to the message I preached in June on the difficulty of unity. So if you weren't here then or didn't hear that, I would challenge you to go back on YouTube and view that. Because I am a builder, I like to build things up. And so just because we're out of one series does not mean that series is gone and forgotten. I will always be recalling and looking back, because as we move forward, we're building on what we've already learned. And as I said when we began this series of war, when we build something, we are entering into another conflict. Because Satan doesn't care if a church's doors remain open as long as our hearts and ears are closed and dull. But he does care when we begin to build. And so as Nehemiah, where we started in this series, not only do we need to build the church for generations to come, but we also need to build with sword in hand, ready to defend, ready to fight, Whether it's inward strife between each other, or strife out there, there are all kinds of wars and things that we will be headed against. But in that series, in that message, The Difficulty of Unity, we talked about this formation up here. And we talked about unity is as important as it was to the Roman centurion and soldiers who made up what is called the testudo. And that's what this formation is. And testudo, if you remember, is Latin for turtle, or tortoise, I should say. So it's the tortoise shell. It is a covering, is a roof. It is what they, I guess, amasses to a human tank as it walked across the battlefield and protected those who were inside. But the key to this is that you needed unity. The shields needed to lock together, and the design of the shields were designed, as we'll learn next time I'm with you, is designed, purpose-built for locking together, so that it's easier to do that. Because if we want to win, we need to fight corporately. But corporately means all together. But within this formation we see, there are individual persons, as we've talked about in the last series, of diverse origins, diverse experiences, temperaments and strengths and weaknesses, fears, levels of commitment and grit. There's differences in this. And as we saw, the victory in battle almost always goes to the army whose ranks remain cohesive, or that they stick together. It is when you can divide a force in half that, generally speaking, that force is lost. Even if they're not all dead yet, even if you've only just divided them, it's pretty much a guarantee that the army that is divided in half will lose. So we need individually, because our corporate cohesiveness comes down to whether or not each of us are equipped, or encouraged, equipped, and enabled to do our part. For the testudo to be effective, each man needed to hold his shield correctly, whether on his left if he was on the left side, the right if he was on his right. In this one, you don't see it, they're only on top. But if you were in the middle of something, you would have the guy on your left and right cover those flanks. And then the people in the middle would hold the shields above their head, and each one was responsible for not only himself, but the one beside him. But each person individually needed to be strong enough, not just for him, but for the whole group. And they needed to move together with one mind, one spirit, one goal, one vision, a vision of victory, and that vision needed to fill all the soldiers. And the examples we use is always Roman soldiers who are fighting for the glory of the empire, or in the early days, the republic. And they fought for earthly kingdoms, earthly crowns, as Paul says in Philippians. But we are facing something more than that, and we're fighting for something greater than that. We fight for the kingdom of heaven, for the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the one who has conquered everything, even death itself. That's who we follow. That's our King. That's Jesus. And so if we want to do this war well, we don't just need to know who the enemy is, but how to actually war, how to battle, how to carry out the conflict on our behalf, on our individual level, so that together we all know the same thing and we move the same way. That's what soldiers do. They're not the same person, but they know the same thing. They have the same instructions, same armor, and the same formations that are put into their minds so that they move the same way. So let's read our text. We'll read all of it today, and we'll just go through the first, 3 verses this morning. So Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 10. Paul says this, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles," or the schemes, "of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, against rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places." And right there you see the devil and his system. You say, I am defending against the devil, his schemes, and the system he has set up, which we have talked about all of those things. And we're that weak link in that chain. Not only is it Satan's system, but there's also self. And armor, as we'll see, will cover that self. But as we move through this, it says it's principalities and powers, which are angelic, which are demonic forces. Rulers of darkness are those men who are in league with Satan. And then the bottom piece of this, what we fight against, the host of wickedness. There's no real word in Greek for host. What it really just means is the collection. It's like all the things. All of the wickedness that we see in the world that infects society is taken into that last part of verse 12. And so in view of that, he says, therefore, take up the whole armor of God. Again, he says the same thing. Take up the whole armor that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, the day of conflict. And having done all, to stand. Stand, therefore. He used that word 4 times. Stand, stand. Make a stand, take a stand, so you're able to stand. Stand, therefore, verse 14, having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate or the body armor of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation or the readiness of the gospel of peace. Above all, and that word above all means covering everything else, which we'll look at next time. Taking a shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. Take the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, being watchful to this end, with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. And for me, this is Paul speaking, that utterance, that I may speak well, that I may open my mouth boldly and make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that in it I may speak boldly as I ought to speak. Now, that's a lot. As I said, we will break that down over the next maybe 2, possibly 3 times that I'm able to be with you. But Paul here, as we begin, as we've discussed, is detailing for us the enemy and the scope of our warfare. He's showing us the whole picture so that we are not unaware of what we face. Jesus never held back in anything he ever said in the Gospels. He always told us the full truth. Jesus never pulled a bait and switch salvation tactic. A lot of times when you go to evangelism classes and stuff, they'll use this one thing to kind of attract people, and then they spring on them the rest of the stuff afterwards. When Jesus never did that. He always says, if you follow me, it means a cross. If it follows me, it means sacrifice. If you follow me, yes, there's eternal life and springing up in you. As he talked to the lady at the well, you have all this good stuff, but he would always tell them there's also this bad stuff. There's things you need to endure, things you need to get through, things that you will have to deal with that previous to coming to me, you did not. We kind of talked about that Wednesday night in our study in Peter, that he is trying to encourage a group of people who used to just live normal lives, who worked in normal workplaces and did all the things and went to the temples and everything else that everybody else did. But now they're suffering in a way they've never suffered before because they named Jesus as their Lord. And it removed them from normal society in their case. And so if you're not here on Wednesday nights, I challenge you to be here too, because that is everything in the Bible is connected. And even Ephesians and 1 Peter, as I've studied both of them, have a lot of similarities. It has a lot of the same themes, and Peter and Paul are very much aligned with the things that they're speaking to us. And Paul just goes into a little more depth here with the armor, but they both speak about the conflict. We started in Peter talking about our adversary, the devil, and here Paul kind of pulls a drop-down menu and shows us a little bit more. So in this, we're going to make it into 3 sections as we look at it. We're going to use the Roman division of the legion to kind of break down this portion of Scripture. If you know anything about the legion, it's 5,120 or 5,120 men. That's what makes up a legion. And that legion is made up of various different compartments and divisions, but one of those is called the century, which consisted of 80 men. And the men were called legionaries, so they're part of the legion. But they were in this group of 80 men, and they were led by what we know so well as the centurion. He was their captain. And so the testudo could be done with as little as 27 men, but the general rule, the formation was made out of a century of 80 men. And so we have a little over 80 in here today, about 80, 90, something like that today in service. So it'd be just a little bit less than what's in here today. All in formation, all with their own armor and their own swords, all trying to move in one direction in sync, in unison. You can think about how difficult of a task that would be to get everybody in here in a square or a rectangle and move forward at the same pace with the same speed and everything else. So that's what the Roman soldiers would do, and that's where unity comes in. But each person individually must be on the same page, which is where we are today. So first, today, we're going to look at the centurion's encouragement, and that's verses 10 through 13. So I want you to picture the ancient battlefield like you're on it. And ranks are forming now on both sides. People are getting into line. They're getting ready to go. The century is here. The 80 men are putting on their armor and beginning to get ready to head out to battle. And the centurion would stand up in front of his men and begin to rally them and begin to strengthen them and encourage them, to give them their heart's strength and a vision to work towards, to instruct their minds, and to remind them that victory in battle is never guaranteed, that they must be vigilant, as Peter says, because the enemy, as Paul says here, is much stronger than they are. And if they don't quiet their fear and remember their training and their instructions and how they use their armor and everything else, that they will lose this fight. What he's about to tell them after this is very important, but this is the beginning. This is his call for strength. Number one, the centurion, in his centurion's speech of encouragement, he has a call for strength. Verse 10, he says, finally, and that word there means as for the rest. He's like, I told you all this other stuff, and this is the last thing I need you to know. And it is. It's almost right before the end of it is at the end of his letter. I need you to remember this. My brethren, my brothers in arms, my fellow soldiers, remember this, finally, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Now, if you were to just look at this, just like it's written down in front of us, you might think it is a call for some grit, for some me, that I just need to buck up, that I need to pull myself up from my own bootstraps, and I just need to get strong. I need to reinforce myself. But the way this word is written, and without getting too nerdy here, is the present passive imperative tense, which in simple terms means you are the recipient of the action and not the doer of it. It's not a command to strengthen yourself, to just grin and bear it because of some internal fortitude that you have. It is an imperative command to allow God to be the strength that you need. It's an acknowledgement that I cannot fight this war on my own. I must have his strength. In the normal worldly sense, the centurion would be trying to call up in their minds these ideas of the empire and of glory and of victory and the spoils of war. And yet here, Paul doesn't do any of that. He says, you need to remember that you have no strength unless it comes from God. You are not the doer of this command. You're simply the one receiving it. Allow the Lord, your connection to him, to empower you. Because far too many men and women think that living the victorious Christian life is some kind of a matter of sheer willpower, that I must make it for God. And even as I grew up, many times people would often talk about the sacrifice of Christ and how just by seeing the brutality that he experienced, that somehow that would be what would motivate me to do. And it does for a little while. But the idea of motivation from something that I didn't see or experience kind of wanes. Power is not found in me making things happen. It's not me necessarily kind of have the mindset. It comes from God. My power, my strength, we rely on that. As we talked about in Sunday school this morning, when I wake up, my initial thought should be, God, I need you to help me through this day, or I will lose this battle. Because we, every day, step into this war. It's not an option. If you are a follower of Christ, you are already in this war. Even if you're not, you're in the wrong side of it, but you don't realize the truth. And now your eyes have been opened, as he says in this book. You have become children of light, and light reveals the darkness. He says that, I think, in chapter 5. He goes through all those things. He says you need to, in fact, in chapter 5, verse 15, he says, see that you walk circumspectly, which means, as a soldier would do, you're aware. It's the same idea that Peter says, be vigilant, be circumspect. To be circumspect means basically have your head on a swivel. Look this way, look that way, understand what's behind you, know what's around you in your environment. Don't be fools, but be wise, he says, redeeming the time because the days are evil or they're worthless. And he goes on and talks about not being drunk. And everywhere through the end of this, he's saying, be aware. Use your head, man. Understand we are in a war. And here he says, the very first thing he says, it's not your strength, it's God's. God has never asked us to fight on our own. And in fact, he warns against it. And again, if we go back to David, we know that when he was a kid, he trusted that way. He fought Goliath, not on his own strength. He said, the battle is not mine, it is the Lord's, right? He said, the battle's not mine, it is the Lord's. And he won that battle. But then when he begins to slack off in his old age, where he says, I've done everything, I've been good to this point, and I don't really need to worry about it. I've made the covenant with my eyes, he says in Psalms. I won't set an evil thing before me, but when an evil thing was set before him, and he's in a lax position, and he wasn't paying attention, he wasn't circumspect, he wasn't vigilant, he's on the roof, and he sees Bathsheba in a place he ought not be. When the evil thing is set in front of him, when he had no choice, he fell. And so we must be circumspect, because not all of the attacks are things in front of us. Sometimes they sneak in, and that's the genius of the devil. He doesn't always attack us the same way. Number two, though, a moment of instruction. He has this call for strength, but he also has a moment of instruction. Verse 11, put on the whole armor, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. So in our picture here, the centurion continues to instruct his legionaries, essentially saying, get ready, boys. This fight is here now, today, and we must make a stand here. There's not an option. You can't get out of it. When you're on a battlefield and the war begins to happen, you don't get to say, I think I'll go home today. Or I think I'll stay in bed. I don't think I'll read my Bible today. I don't think I'll do this. I don't think that I feel like fighting today. Can you schedule it for next week? You don't get to do that. He says you need to put on the whole armor now, so that now you are able to stand against the wiles or the schemes, the methods of the devil. It is a commitment, not just to find your strength in God, but to hold ground against the enemy. The phrase whole armor is the Greek word panoplia or panoplia, which is the same word we get panoply, which means the complete. We use it today in the sense of something being complete, the complete system of something. I don't know what else you'd use it for, but it originally meant the complete suit of armor, not parts of it, not pieces of it, but the whole thing. So the whole armor, the whole system of armor, every single piece must be taken. I can't just have this. I can't just walk around with this in my hand and expect that I'll win. It must also be within me. It must be the truth that girds me. It must be the righteousness that covers me. It must be the faith that shields me, and on it goes. And you must have all the pieces. A man walking into battle with only a sword, but no shield, no helmet, no breastplate, no nothing else, he's probably not going to win. He's not going to do so well. So he says, take on the whole thing. The word wiles, as I said, the wiles of our adversary, the devil, or his schemes or his methods. The word there can mean craftiness or trickery or deceit. And we quoted from Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese general, way back in the beginning of this, in his book, The Art of War. And we're going to quote him again. And this is one of the quintessential quotes on warfare. And if you've ever played Modern Warfare 3, you'll recognize this, which is like, a quarter of you. But it starts out with, all warfare is based on deception. Hence, when we are able to attack, we must act like we are not. When we are close, we must act like we are far. When we are far, we must act as though we were close. When we are acting, we must look like we are inactive. And on through his chapter in that book, he talks about how deceit is an integral part of warfare. You must make your enemy believe one thing when you're doing something else. And man, does that not picture for us perfectly what Satan does for us, what his system does for us. It says, you're doing self-help right now, when really what you're doing is damaging your family. You are not, you've done enough. You can sit down and take a rest, when really what you're doing is shirking responsibility. And it's always, this is what it looks like, but this is what it is. And you see this element of deception throughout all warfare. If you read any kind of history of any war, you'll see this happen. The ones who win are the craftiest, the ones who can deceive, the ones who can act like they're one thing, but they're not. In fact, one of the problems with this formation was that it was unwieldy, so it was difficult to use against archers and horsemen and stuff, and there was a battle in which Rome deployed this tactic, and they lost horribly, because what they would do, they would wait for them to sit down, and as immediately as they would set it up, the archers would come in, or they would shoot one of the larger projectiles and destroy almost the whole troop. And so Rome, because up to that point had worked, they figured, well, it will keep working. And it didn't. And they lost a bunch of people. But then the next time they faced that same people, they adapted and they fixed it. And what they did was act like they were on one knee in this formation. And they acted like they were tired because they were going up a hill. And so as soon as they did that, they knew the enemy would do the same thing they did before because it worked so well the first time. And the archers and the cavalry came in, and they got up from their spot, ready to fight, because they acted like they were tired and worn out, like the hill was too much for them. They couldn't carry their armor, and they're sitting down taking a break. And as soon as the cavalry approached them, they sprung up, and they destroyed 20,000 of their opposing forces. So you see how when you expect one thing to keep working, you must understand that the enemy knows that. And you see it in warfare. They think one thing's going to work. It's always worked. Well, your enemy's thinking, okay, that worked last time. What can I do to circumvent that? And it's back and forth and back and forth. And it will be the same thing in your life. When you conquer one sin, there's going to be another sin that pops up. Or he'll just do the same sin in a different way. Pride's that way. Bitterness is that way. I know in my own life, I've dealt with portions of time where someone's done something, and you think you can get past bitterness, and you think it's gone, and then 5 seconds later, you're thinking about it in another way again, and that thought about this person who's done this thing keeps coming back over and over again in different forms, in different ways. And that's what warfare is. It's a constant shifting of tactics, deceiving your enemy until somebody loses, and that is what we are in. So he instructs them, look, man, the devil knows what we do. He knows who we are. He knows our weaknesses. You need to put on the whole armor that you may be able to stand. Because as Christians, we need to realize that in every war we fight, every battle we get into with the devil, with his system and everything else, we are outmatched and outclassed every single time. The only thing we have, the only thing that we have at all is God's strength and His armor He gives us. That's it. You will never win a battle without those two things, and without the things we'll discuss throughout the last part of the series. We are in no way a match for anything that's coming against us. We must stand in the power of God. We must use His armor. Paul, number 3, though, the warning of resistance. So Paul, our centurion here, is warning us that if you do not heed what I'm saying about taking the armor, then just look, as I said, at the level of the enemy. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We wrestle against principalities and powers, rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. Essentially saying we are no match for that. It's above us. It's beyond us. We must go into it with the mindset that I am with God and God is with me, and I'm going to win not because of me, but because of the armor of God and His presence, His Spirit. This is verse 13. Therefore, take up. Again, he first says, take it up, and then he explains why, and then he repeats what he said in the beginning. Take it up, therefore, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. So if you don't think that victory is the point here, he uses the word stand 4 times in this part. I need you to take a stand, to withstand, that in this war we will not back down. And there's a piece of the armor specifically tailored for that one idea, which we'll get into next week, or next time I'm here. But the reality is that we are to push forward, that victory is the goal. And the last stand here in verse 13 we see, or the second to last, and the next verse says stand again. But in the last part of our text this morning, he says to stand here means or carries with it the idea of standing in victory over your opponent on the field. So just as in verse 12, where we explained the other week that wrestling is a contest between two opponents who are trying to throw the other, and that contest at that time ended not with someone's arms being pinned to the ground, but hands around the throat of your opponent, your adversary. That's how visceral it was. That's the picture that they're using. It's not this nice, like, okay, you pinned my shoulders, let me up now. It's choking someone's life out of them. That's the kind of victory that the devil wants to get on us, and that they're warning us we need to be aware of. But Paul here is saying that's the kind of thing that you need to have in mind. That I'm going to win, and not just win, but I'm going to conquer. So Paul, like any great leader, is giving us a picture of victory to visualize. If you're a coach, you don't go out there and say to your team, well, they're a big team and they're better than us. I guess we'll just try and do our best. You say, no, they're bigger than us, they're faster than us, but we know that if we go out there and put it on the field, we have a shot. And then you give them an idea, a visual of, like, this is what it will look like. You're David and they're Goliath. You'll stand on them when it's done. Yes, it'll be hard. Yes, we'll get hurt. But if we can beat them, if we can overcome the other team, the enemy, then we will stand on the field of victory. And what Paul says here is, he says the idea is the standing in victory. Essentially, the centurion, Paul, or however you want to visualize it, is saying, if you follow my lead, boys, you'll not only win, but you will stand on the neck of your enemy. Now, that's the kind of speech I want to hear before I go to battle, right? I don't want to hear I possibly might die, even though that's true. I don't want to feel like I'm going to lose. I want my coach, my captain, to say, you will stand in victory on the neck of your enemy if you just do what I say. Because if you see in this picture, the centurion was not somewhere else behind them, driving them forward. He's the guy right here in the middle. He leads his men. He's in front. He's not telling them to do something that he himself would not do. And no great leader will ever ask someone to do something that they themselves would not be willing to do. And the centurion is not saying, you boys go out there. He says, come with me and follow my lead. Do what I say, and we'll have a chance for victory. Because as I said earlier in this series, we are victors. We are not victims. We are built for victory. Jesus has called us for that purpose. He has made us to be more than conquerors, Paul says in Romans. And we are in this to win this. And we have everything we need to do that. We have it. And that's what he's going to list for us. He's going to tell us exactly what it needs to look like, how it fits together, how you put it on, how it should function, what it represents. And as we head into that next time, I'm here with you and able to go through this, we'll begin to see how important each piece is on its own, and then the collective good that it can do. But there's going to be one key at the end, one key, and it's the one thing that will get us, even if we think we have all those other pieces. And we'll look at that. I want to ask the musician to come and play softly as we close up this morning. And I would ask you to reverently stand and just with heads bowed and eyes closed. And as I said last week, if you have no need of the altar this morning, simply pray for those who do.